those things today, except for Dr. King. But this is what I think he would want us to get back for. Dr. King would say, what are you willing to die for? How much are you willing to give for justice and peace? We're all so comfortable in this empire. Number 6, to unpack this even more, not just risk, but suffering. Now, this is really politically incorrect. Gandhi says we have to accept suffering without retaliating to humanity. If you want to end the war in Iraq, and racism and violence and 25,000 nuclear weapons. Working under this law of our being, he's talking about conscious suffering. It is possible for a single individual to defy the whole might of an unjust empire and rescue honor, religion, soul, and then lay the foundation of that empire's nonviolent fall or regeneration. That's really powerful. That's deep wisdom.
I have a cousin who was involved in the inner circle of the feminist movement in the 1950s. And so you could imagine that when we sat around the dinner table as a family, there was a lot of lively discussion about, what was happening in the world, who are the disadvantaged people, who are the marginalized people, what can we do to, try to empower these people, get them rights, and try to tackle these problems in a way that everyone got ahead, no one was hurt. I began to study Asia and Buddhism about over 30 years ago, and I was very fortunate in the 1980s to meet the Dalai Lama's oldest brother, Tutanjigme Norbu, who happens to live in Indiana. And I heard him speak at a library, and he was lucky enough to go back to Tibet and take a look at Tibet. At that time, the Chinese government were trying to convince him that the Tibetans should come back, and they allowed him to go in there. And he came to this library and gave a...
What we're going to talk about today is cultural genocide that happens in Tibet.
I cannot deny or repress any longer what I and others like me have done. I'll get over this won't last time. Because what happens with men when they come back, there's an old Latin saying by Horace, dulce et decorum est pro patriam mari. Wilfred Owen, the World War I British poet, wrote a poem about that. The English translation, it is sweet to be coming to die for your country. But, we lose 58,000 in Vietnam. We lost almost 1,100 in Iraq now, and I don't know how many hundreds in the years in between and the various things we've been involved in. But there's many, many more coming home that haven't died for their country. But a question I have is, how sweet and becoming is it to kill for your country? And you read the stories, especially here in the South, in Fort Bragg, guys are killing their families, they're coming back and they're being violent, because there is something, Thomas Merton wrote a beautiful thing a few years ago, that at the center of our being is a point of nothingness which is untouched by sin and illusion. That's all of us, that's every one of us. A point of pure truth, a point or spark which belongs entirely to God, which is never at our...
The international seminar in New Delhi, being organized under the patronage of the Prime Minister, because Prime Minister is the head of the Gandhian National Trust, and the meeting being organized is sponsored by Gandhian National Trust. So our idea is that Mahila Shanti Sona should become visible on the Indian stage, and we are inviting major funding agencies, see they become interested. And the idea is that in a country like India, where people are very hesitant, they will say, in this age and time, why Mahila, why men and women? As people say here, why not men and women together? And the reason is really that it's not going to work. In a country where you have such a cultural divide between men and women would not feel even comfortable to go with their husband, forget about going with a group. You go to any temple here, women and men sit differently. They don't mix. It may take a generation to get out of it. So idea was to make them secure, comfortable with other women, bring them in group, talk to them, and convince men that you have to trust the women. They are learning something. They are not causing a revolution. They are not going to stop cooking. That's the first thing. That's the first thing most men worry about. And in fact, the funny thing is, you invite these women, now we invite their husband. Because they will be sitting around trying to listen at the end of the room. Idea was to invite them and tell them that this is, they to take a sense of pride.
As far as we know, none of the people that she interviewed have been hurt as a result of her project. So it says that we took the necessary measures to make that happen.
I would like to address a question to any of the panelists. Now is the time. Let's start over here.
Yes, I have a question for Doris Kirkpatrick. At the end, even after you said the TRC did something, and what I was wondering is maybe to go through a situation like TRC where so much that was buried away and never spoken about could actually be traumatic, but maybe some of that trauma needs to happen. I'm thinking of this book by Anki Krog, Country of My Skull. She was one of the reporters who covered the TRC. And as you're reading it and you're about 200 pages into this 500-page book, you find out she has a mental breakdown.
About mental breakdowns of people who worked on the TRC.
And my mother was a social activist and had started her own organization. And so we were always involved in both of these activities. And growing up, I realized that art and social activism, and that art and activism could be a powerful vehicle for social change. And so I grew up as an artist. I came here to the U.S. to study at the Art Institute of Chicago, and have been an artist, a practicing artist up to today. But about 10 years ago, because the Shanti Foundation is 10 years old, it's actually 11, I started to bring these two forces together, being passionate about art and being passionate about nonviolence, and saw the relationship between the two, how similar the processes were between the two, art and nonviolence. And we were talking because of the restrictions of the British. He worked with the Harijans, which were
the United States. Here we can experience, by accepting voluntarily poverty, what it means to be poor and black in this country. The group initially was about 7, and almost immediately 3 African Americans, 3 blacks, 3 Negroes moved in, and an Indian named Shrida Rami, whose 1939, he had been expelled from India, or was in exile from India, and published a book called War Without Violence. I'll pass out, I'm not technologically sufficient, so if you want to see the kind of things that were circulating, just please get them back. His book, War Without Violence, John Holmes's book on Mahatma and his world, and the earlier book on nonviolence that I mentioned, Bush. The older civil rights movement, such as the NAACP, to become more proactive and to become more active in the court system. In this way, I believe the Harlem Ashram, though short-lived, had an impact far beyond their small numbers. They influenced a generation that would subsequently...
I'm Emily Dunn. I'm from Atlanta. In high school in Atlanta. Really? Oh. And I came up with Katie and another current high school student and a former student and 2 teachers and a student who went to like our school but now attends Rhodes.
Oh, okay. So you had a connection to it.
And drove up Friday morning.
Great. Got out of high school.
Ontological assumptions, the assumptions that one has about the nature of being, is critical to this re-education project. A more fluid and inclusive identification with all inanimate and animate objects blurs the boundaries of self and other and provides a foundation for a fresh way of relating to both the human and non-human world. Through this re-education process, non-dual existence becomes a perceptual and affective norm, which nonviolence and compassion naturally flow from. So I'm challenging this, this process of self and other, and asking questions about it. What does it mean when we otherize? Why do we otherize? In the past, I've talked about a concept that
inner dispositions, what people think inside themselves. And basically, when a situation is what you expect it to be, you're going to attribute people as responding to the situation. That is to say, one person does violence, another person does violence back, you expect that, you think provocation. And the attacker who is receiving the nonviolent response, receiving a violent response, will just be expecting that, well, this is the situation, I'm repressing this evil person who deserves to be repressed. What happens, though, is that when these
practice and do well, and what ends up happening is he ends up in a parish next to the projects, the Henry Horner homes in Chicago. Those of you know they're not far from the Loop downtown, now being gentrified and people being pushed out and buildings coming down, but that's another story. And this was in the 80s, and the gang warfare in Chicago was intense. It was very severe, and he felt drawn now to start to think about these 4 principles, right, in the context of his story, as an invitation to act, and to start by building relationship with, in particular, gang members in these projects. Most of the gangster disciples and the vice lords are the 2 main warring.
Using academic language, which is the language of the elite, which
where
is
the
language of
where the poor sisters and
control
brothers
is so contradictory to Gandhian principles of solidarity with the common people. And so in that way we're undermining what we most believe in right there.
And
that's a problem too.
And I understand this is the first, conference. But if we are unconscious of it, it's one thing. Mm-hmm. If it's unspoken, it's another. And if we continue to act in this way, it's another. Mm-hmm. I really don't have disposable income, but I sacrificed $25 because I figured if I paid, I could say what I needed to say. But really, this it has to be said. Mm-hmm. And this.
Mahila Shanti Sena, Women's Peace Work and Women's Peace Force. And it's a movement where we are training women for non-violence, peace and democracy, rural women. 99% of them are illiterate. And the remarkable thing is that the first batch of women who were trained, 100 women, and we had an international conference on peace, non-violence and democracy. These women in their new graduation, saffron color scarves, they sat in that. And since I was not part of the program committee, who are the people who are speaking? And you will see most of the time in India or outside India, Gandhians in
which is Gandhian King, The Power of Nonviolent Resistance. And I can definitely plug this book. I'm using this book right now in a class that I'm teaching at Christian Brothers University on Gandhi and King. If you are somebody who teaches nonviolence at the high school or college level, this is an excellent book. It puts together the life of Gandhi and King. It compares them in terms of their nonviolent campaigns and philosophy. And it's very readable, and something that I know I like and my students like, it has pictures. So it's a very good book for that. He is currently, Dr. Mike Nodime is currently at work on his second book, Days of Decision, Pivotal Moments in U.S. Foreign Policy.
I taught a course on Gandhi and King
couldn't find a book on Gandhi and King. They had to buy a book on Gandhi, a book on King, they had to buy a book on nonviolence. It was too expensive for them, so I wrote my own book and charged them about half what they had to spend on the other book. So that was my initial goal, to serve my students. Today I'd like to do a comparison of Gandhi and King in 4 areas. And this is my PowerPoint presentation. Sorry about that. The 4 areas are, I want to compare them as leaders, as religious devotees or as men of faith, as men, and as heroes. So, as leaders, I'm going to do 2 things in that category as leaders. First, he did not spare Martin. He called nonviolence a cowardice-producing narcotic. Amazing metaphor. But King responded. King had good, strong responses. He responded on a practical level. He said, look, if you use violence, you're going to get killed. If you use violence, the whites can call you a mob, and then they can slaughter you. So it doesn't work anyway. And second of all, hate does not replace hate. Like darkness does not replace darkness. Murder does not kill murder. Only love in that book. I'd like to say a little bit more about their confrontation with their Muslim minorities. I think that was one of the...
and founder of the Gandhi Institute for Nonviolence, to please stand. Of meeting Mr. Gandhi 2 years. The driving force behind the Gandhi Institute, and some of you had the pleasure to get to know him and hear him speak earlier in the conference. And we thank you for being who you are and getting us all motivated for the next fight in bringing nonviolence to this world. It is my pleasure to introduce you to the man.
Good evening. Are you having fun?
Yeah!
These 2 days have been absolutely beautiful. I want to begin with a story, and this is a story about the 5-year-old and 8-year-old. One day I came home from work, and I saw my 8-year-old frisking my 5-year-old. The 5-year-old had his arms stretched out. The 8-year-old was using a clapper, like a wand. Slowly and methodically, moved it through the curvature of the body. What are you doing? I said, puzzled. The 5-year-old promptly replied, Daddy, we're playing security. Get in line, you're next. So I got in line. So with a clapper, the 8-year-old wanded me, and then she brought a toy box. And then with a toy cover, the box cover, she said, empty your pockets and put them in the basket. And as I started to take the material, the cell phone and my keys, I was befuddled. Should I continue this game, I thought? Or should I stop and say, I don't want to play this game of security? And as it went on, I sort of thought to myself, if my children in America are playing this game of security, What must be the children in Palestine playing? Here comes a tank. Let's run, throw rocks, and then see if they don't shoot us. What must the children in Israel be playing? Here comes a Qassam rocket. Everyone hide and see, no one gets killed. Or the children in Africa. What must they be playing? Who wants to be the patient with AIDS and who wants to be the doctor? Why are we having a conference on nonviolence? Violence envelopes our culture today. Global violence, the terrorism and the militarism. Local violence, racism and prejudice. And personal violence, violence of hatred and greed. The media, the television, our schools, our homes, they're all saturated with this violence. And many people think, people at the hospital where I work, people I talk to in my day-to-day life think that the only way to respond to violence is to retaliate in violence. And you know, sometimes I begin to think the same way until I pick up the phone and call up Arun Gandhi or make a visit to him and talk about his work and his grandfather's work. There are options, and the options are this conference. This conference is that option. This conference is the hope to rekindle the flame of nonviolence so that we can show ourselves, our peers, our children, that some of the greatest conflicts in the world were solved in nonviolent ways. And that we try. And if we try hard enough, we can make a difference. And nonviolence just does not happen. One of the things I learned and heard in this conference, it has to be taught. Just as terrorism is taught, just as military is trained, just as doctors are educated, similarly, nonviolence must be taught. And so, yesterday and today, we gathered academics and activists from around the nation to come and talk. But it took an effort. How did this conference come about? Some years ago, I met Arun Gandhi and we began a dialogue. We had a hope. He had a dream to have a conference in Memphis, but so many priorities took the stage, and this was on the back burner, until one day, in my innocent idealism, I told him that it could be done with a grant. And when they wrote that grant, we had just asked for $20,000. Our budget was $25,000. The Assisi Foundation liked our grant so much, they gave us $25,000 full, and then $25,000 for next year. Truly in debt to the Assisi Foundation. So often, charity is contagious. Love is contagious. Nonviolence is contagious. Let's spread it throughout the world. Thank you.
And from there, he went on to Nashville to join the Nashville Christian Leadership Council as chair of the Direct Action Committee, where he helped to organize, train, and launch a nonviolent movement to desegregate downtown Nashville. And while studying at Vanderbilt, the School of Divinity, during those turbulent years, he was expelled for his steadfast position to eliminate injustice. His journey led him to Memphis, to the seminary.
Much more awareness of the history of nonviolence and the like. But on the other side of the coin, how can you teach a way of being and doing in a fashion to lay the foundation for personal and social transformation if in the academic field we do not teach it in a fashion so that it becomes a kind of a laboratory for young men and women and for older men and women as well to take upon themselves. Gathered here this evening, a daring people. We hunger for a better world, which we know is vibrant in our very genes. We know with utter confidence that we can have a very different Memphis, a very different Los Angeles, a very different Washington before this night. We are the world we seek. We are the people we would become. And I personally have been lifted and exhilarated by my presence here yesterday and today. We know very few details about one another. We know very little about each other's backgrounds. We hardly know very many names.
This mantra also helps to calm and focus the body and mind. Om. Let us all repeat this mantra 3 times together. There's a very beautiful Hindi hymn titled Meri Bhavna. Translated, that means my aspirations. And this song describes wishes for happiness, not only for the self, but for all living beings. We'd like to read the English translation of several of the stanzas that's quite poignant to the theme of this conference. I'll start off, and Chanchala will join me with some of the other translations. The first stanza says, "May I always have a feeling of friendliness for all living beings in the world. May the river of sympathy be ever flowing in my heart for those in agony and with affliction. May I never feel angry with the unkind or the vicious. May I always remain tranquil in dealing with all adversity."